Hello YouTube, Virginia here. I got my coffee and I am heading out to do grocery shopping on a very gloomy and rainy day, and it's flipping cold. So I figured, since I tend to not take the children with me to grocery shop, it would be a perfect time to do drive time / story time video for everybody. So today I am going to talk about my first VBA2C experience. So for new subscribers who don't know, my husband Thomas and I have 5 children, and the first 2 were born by C-section, and they were some pretty horrible experiences for me, and I'll probably maybe sometime make a video about my C-section experiences and whatnot, but the short of it is they were pretty traumatizing for me. And when I found out that I was pregnant with our 3rd child, I was like, I am not having another C-section if I don't have to. So when I found out that I was pregnant, or actually before I found out I was pregnant, I had done a lot of research on having a natural birth after 2 C-sections, and which is called a VBA2C. And I had decided that I was going to do whatever I could to find a doctor who would oversee it. And because where I live in the Athens area of Georgia, where I live, none of the OBGYNs will perform a C-section a VBA2C after 2 C-sections. So I went onto my ICANN forum and I found a doctor in Norcross, which is about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on traffic, away from where I live, that does VBA2Cs after 2 C-sections. So when I found out I was pregnant, he was who I called, and he is a fantastic doctor. He delivered my last 3 children, and he's just an amazing doctor. He was definitely called to be a doctor, or to be an OBGYN. Anyway, so I'm gonna get to my birth story with Timothy. My pregnancy with him was pretty uneventful. I did have gestational diabetes towards the end, but it wasn't bad. I was able to control it very easily with diet, and I didn't even have to work at it. It was really not that bad. I didn't have to work at it very hard. So anyway, I had for weeks I say weeks, probably a week or 2, couple weeks, had what's called prodromal labor, and it's somewhere between Braxton Hicks and pre-labor. It's not actually, you're not actually going into labor, but it's like your body's, it's almost like it's trying to go into labor, but not. Anyway, the contractions are worse than Braxton Hicks, not as bad as actual labor, and they never get consistent. And so it would up and down, I would have contractions for a few hours, and then it would peter out, and they would never be like exactly 5 minutes apart or whatever. It'd be like 10 minutes apart, and then 5 minutes apart, and then 15, and it would do that for a few hours, and then it would stop. And so finally one night, night, it was a Monday night, I was like, I really, like, it wasn't totally consistent, but it wasn't going away. And it had been going on for like way more hours. So, because this doctor is so far away, he actually delivers in Midtown Atlanta, which is definitely a 2-hour drive from where I live. And so we really had to kind of consider, with having the other 2 children at the time, and with Thomas's work schedule and everything else, we really had to consider whether or not we were going to go, if I was actually in labor or not. And mind you, I was 40 weeks and 6 days by then. So we talked and we decided, okay, we probably need to go ahead and go. And at the time, we didn't have anybody in town who could watch the kids. So we had to load up the children, and this was in the middle of the night. Had to load up the children, drive all the way to Atlanta, to the hospital, and then I was in triage, and they were looking me over and like, well, you're having contractions, but they're not very regular, and they're not very strong, and but the baby's heart rate is really fast. So they called my doctor in, and he was looking, he's like, well, he said, it is kind of, baby's heart rate is kind of fast. Well, let's watch you for a couple of minutes, or for a little bit. And so they had me turn on one side or the other and whatnot, and kept an eye on the baby's heart rate and stuff, and his heart rate did go down. So he was like, well, I don't think you're in labor, and I think the baby's okay. So, because the heart, he's like, his sorry, you're about to see my mild road rage come out. Anyway, they were getting way out of control, and then Timothy started really going into distress, and I was going into distress. So my doctor says, and Dr. Tate, he does not do a C-section unless there's an actual medical need to do so, like it's actually an emergency. So he says, look, we're gonna have to figure something out to slow your labor down, because you're not handling it, the baby's not handling it, and if we can't slow your labor down, we're gonna have to consider a C-section. Or we're gonna no, I take that back. He didn't say we're gonna have to consider it. He said we're gonna do a C-section. And so at that point, I kind of knew. I was like, something's not right. So he suggested. He said we can go ahead and try an epidural, and for its stalling effects, and see if that helps to put your labor into a more normal pattern. It helps the baby, and it helps you. So, and he said, and if it doesn't work, then we have the epidural in place already, and we can just, real quick, get you in there and do a C-section. So I said, okay. So they did the epidural, and it worked. It brought my labor to a normal pattern, which brought Timothy down from being in distress, and brought me down from being in distress. And it really wasn't too long after that he was born. But I didn't get to see him or anything. They took him immediately over to the warmer and basically kind of started working on him. And he gave out this tiny little mew of a cry. And so they're like, we have to take him to the NICU. So I barely got to see him. They showed him to me for like 2 seconds, and then they rushed him off to the NICU. And once I was given the okay, I went down there, and what they explained to me is they're like, when babies go into distress, they get really messed up. And they said most babies, within a few hours, they bounce back and they're okay. So they said, worst case, he was born at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So they're like, worst case, he should be in your room by tomorrow morning. And it just seemed to have it almost seemed like it got worse from there. And he was in a little cube where they were pumping oxygen into it and everything. At one point, he had a collapsed lung. Like one day, one of his lungs collapsed, and but then it was better the next day. They were listening to his heart and all this other kind of stuff, and they're like, he's just taking such a long time coming back from the distress. He did start getting better when, by the time he was 6 days old, they said it's taking him a long time, because they kept checking his blood for some kind of protein or something that indicated whether or not it's like some kind of protein or something that your body produces when it's trying to heal, and they wanted to see that number come down before they sent him home. And they said, well, it's coming down. It's just coming down a lot slower than we would like to see. But since it is coming down, we're going to go ahead and let him go home. You're just going to have to keep following up, pretty much almost on a daily basis with your pediatrician. And but they said, just to be on the safe side, we're going to check his heart. We're going to do an echocardiogram, which is an ultrasound on his heart, just to make sure. We don't think it's his heart. We haven't seen any kind of indication that there was anything wrong with his heart, but we're going to check just to make sure. So about an hour or so later, the doctor came in, and like I said, he was 6 days old at this point, but thankfully, because we live far away, they have these room-in suites, which is like a little cubby hole with 4 rooms. It's right next to the NICU, where parents who have babies who are coming home from the NICU soon can stay in. And so they let me stay in one of those because they didn't expect him to stay for very long. Well, they come in and they said, we're life flighting him to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. He has a heart defect. And I lost it. I didn't, Thomas had to go back home with the kids and everything else, so I was by myself getting this news that my son has a heart defect. And at this point, I had a fever. I was bleeding profusely, and I just wasn't even paying any attention to myself. And I honestly, because I had 2 C-sections, I was like, well, maybe a natural birth, the bleeding, maybe the bleeding's different, and it and whatnot. And so I didn't think any. I was more concerned about Timothy than I was myself. And I just, like I said, I just didn't know. And so anyway, so I have to call Thomas and tell him they found something wrong with Timothy's heart. You need to come here now. And they're taking him to Children's Healthcare, and I'm going over there with him, meet me there. So he had to load the children up, and he took them to my mom's house, because she lives not very far from Atlanta. And so he met me at Children's Healthcare, and at that point I really didn't know what was wrong with him. I just knew there was something wrong with his heart. Like, they tried to explain it. The way the doctors were explaining it to me, they didn't make it very clear. I couldn't understand what they were talking about. But the doctors at Children's Healthcare, they were able to explain it to me. And they said he has bicuspid aortic valve stenosis. So basically his aortic valve only has 2 leaflets instead of 3 like it's supposed to. And the leaflets are very stiff and the opening is very narrow. And he had thickening of I think it's the right ventricle. Anyway, it's the chamber where the aortic valve goes out, that it was thickened. And so they started immediately on him on all these medications that was going to keep the one blood vessel between, it's like a blood vessel between 2 other blood vessels that a fetus has, that closes up. Where is this ambulance going? That's fun. Anyway, they gave him a medication that keeps that open so that he had better blood flow and everything. And they said he's in bad shape. And they said the doctor that actually did his procedure said that the way he described it is, he said that his aortic valve is clumpy. And I'm like, I'm freaking out. I don't even know what that, I'm like, I don't even know what any of that means. So he says, we're going to do a procedure, and he says it's a balloonplasty is what he called it. Basically what it is it's like when they do an angioplasty. They go in through the big arteries or veins or whatever it is in the leg, and they go up to the heart, and they use a balloon to inflate and deflate. And they inflate it and deflate it and inflate it and deflate it to stretch that valve out. And he said this is not a permanent fix. He says this is just to keep him alive until we decide what kind of valve replacement we need to do. And valve replacement means stopping his heart. It's open heart surgery, basically. So, of course, we're flipping out. But they said, they're like, okay, they did the procedure, and while he was in surgery, Thomas was finally able to show up. And of course, the first thing I do is I just fall into his arms, like hysterically crying and stuff. Like, I wasn't crying the whole time anyway, but I was holding myself together in front of other people. I was just crying when I was alone. And anyway, so the doctor comes after the procedure and he says he did fantastic. He said this procedure did so much better than we were expecting it to. We were not expecting it to go anywhere near as well as it did. And so that was a huge relief. So he's like, you know, things are looking really good right now. And so at that point they said, you know, he was in the ICU that day, but they said if everything looks good in the morning and stuff, we might move into what's called the step down unit, which is basically he didn't have to be in the ICU, but it was like a room, but it was a private room, and we would actually be able to stay in the private room. They said, but for tonight, you know, we'll give you let you stay in one of these what do they call it, sleep pods, and it's basically a closet with a chair that folds out into a bed, and that's all that's in there. But it's in like the family section, so they have showers and stuff over there too. So at that point I'm like, I'm having chills and stuff from a fever and everything else, and I told Thomas, I'm like, I'm gonna go get in the shower and relax and try to feel better and stuff. I feel a little bit better that he's okay, at least for right now. Things went better than they were expecting it to. You know, I can, you know, go shower and try to, you know, kind of get myself together. Well, while I was in the shower, I had a massive clot of some sort come out, and I freaked out because I didn't know what it was. And so it's a little TMI, but I looked at it because I didn't know what the heck it was. I was scared. I'm like, what is this? And I saw a piece of amniotic sac attached to it, and I went, oh my gosh, that's placenta. And I didn't know what, plus, I mean, because I was in the shower, the water was running on it, and it was turning gray, and usually you would think a clot would kind of just break up, but this was turning gray, and I'm like, that's what meat does when the blood runs out of it. And so I was like, this is not good. So I kind of freaked out, and honestly, when it came out, I immediately felt better, and the bleeding immediately slowed down to like not even as heavy as a period, because like at this point I had bled through like some like clothes and everything. Like Thomas had to bring me so many changes of clothes and stuff, because at one point I had to try to wash my underwear in a sink and then throw it in the dryer that was there, where the family unit was, they had washers and dryers. I had to try to, because I was just bleeding profusely. And so he brought me a bunch of clothes, and so I, you know, was able to put some clean clothes on finally. And so anyway, I immediately felt better, and so I was freaking out though. So I called my doctor and I told him what happened, and he said, well, has the bleeding slowed down? I said, well, yeah, it's not a lot at all at this point. Because that was another thing I noticed too, was like I said, I had to get TMI again, but it was the smell. The smell was like something dead, and then that smell immediately went away once that chunk was gone. And I mean, it was like the size of a softball. And he said, don't panic. He said, your body's done exactly what it's supposed to do and got rid of it. And he said, you need to watch yourself. He says, if the bleeding comes back or the fever doesn't go away, go to the ER immediately. And thankfully, because I was already in a hospital, and he knew that, because he said he had been calling all the doctors and stuff to check up and see how the baby was doing and stuff. Because I was already in a hospital, even though it was a children's hospital. I mean, I'm pretty sure if I was hemorrhaging, they wouldn't have turned me away if I needed help. So Anyway, so but all the bleeding stopped, the fever went away. I felt like physically, I felt so much better. And I'm pretty sure the fact that, you know, them saying, you know, we think he's going to be okay, at least for now, you know, that helped a lot. Knowing that he wasn't going to die. And, hold on here. Let me back up. This guy's trying to get out. Sorry, I made it to Sam's. So, trying to find a parking space. But, anyway, so, that dude almost hit me. Seriously? So, anyway, so that ended up being fine, but man, it was scary. It was really, really scary. So, anyway, they, ended up moving him to the step-down unit, and, cause everything went great, and so they're like, we're gonna watch him for a day or so, and as long as that valve stays open, you know, then you guys can go home, but you'll have to follow up with the cardiologist in your town. And thankfully, Children's Healthcare, which I can't say enough good about Children's Healthcare. They are amazing. They are fantastic people. They are a fantastic hospital. Everybody there was so nice. The doctors, they, you know, worked really hard to make sure that they were able to explain to us what was going on, what was wrong with Timothy, you know, how he was doing and everything else. And so anyway, so they were going to let us go home, and they said that it was a miracle how well everything went with his surgery and everything, because they were like, you know, what they actually said was, they were like, you were so blessed that there, you know, you can look at a situation like this and you can't say that there isn't a God. You know, it to me it's proof, because he had so many people praying for him, and the doctors said, if you had just gone through a repeat C-section, he would have never gone into distress. He would have never had a hard time recovering. They never would have found his heart defect, and he would have been dead within a couple of weeks. So I actually had a negative comment. It was actually the only negative comment, surprisingly, that I got on my I Chose VBAC video, where the woman said, how dare you put your child's life at risk. And first of all, it was such an ignorant and uneducated comment to make. Don't comment on something you don't know anything about at all. But if I had not chosen that VBAC, my son would be dead. The fact that I had an abnormal labor that put him into distress was what saved his life, because that was how they were able to find his defect. And so anybody who tries to tell me that I was selfish or horrible or anything else like that for choosing to have a VBAC with him, you know, I hate to say it, but you can go screw yourself, because that's what saved my son's life. And I'm never, ever gonna feel bad for it. So they had said, so we had to take him frequently, like every week or so, to the cardiologist here in town to have echocardiograms done to make sure that his valve was staying open. And it was staying open, and so we were able to go longer and longer periods of time, until he finally, when he was 2, they said that they could just check him once a year. And what they said was that they expected to have to do another balloonplasty when somewhere between the ages of 4 and 5, because they said the goal was to go as long as possible before having to do valve replacement. They said that he's going to eventually have to have valve replacement, but they want to go as long as possible because he's still a kid. And if they had to replace his valve as a kid, that means several surgeries throughout his life, and they would prefer to reduce the number of surgeries he would have to have. So they were expecting him to have the balloonplasty done again between 4 and 5 years old. He is going to be 6 in like 3 weeks, and there has been no changes. His valve has stayed open with mild regurgitation. The ventricle that was thickened has thinned out to a normal size, and isn't, so the valve, so the chamber is as big as it's supposed to be, because when the wall was thickened, it was a smaller valve. It made it a smaller chamber. So all of that, they said his heart is as close to normal as it's capable of being, and it's stuck by the grace of God. I give God all the glory on that. It has stuck, and we are eternally blessed for that. So we continue to pray that it stays open at least till he gets to his adult size. So anyway, so that's pretty much the whole of the story of when Timothy was born. My VBAC was successful. I had no actual problems other than the retained placenta, and my body took care of that, thank God. And before anybody tries to say, well, why didn't your doctor, notice that anything was wrong or whatever, the heavy bleeding didn't really show itself until after I had already been discharged from the hospital. And at that, while I was in the hospital, it was actually the nurses who were supposed to be watching for that. And the second thing is your doctor can't know something if you don't tell them. And I didn't tell him that I was bleeding heavily or having a fever or anything. I didn't tell him because first of all, I didn't know, because I had never had a natural birth before. And number two, I was more focused on Timothy than I was myself. And so if I had told him, he would have known immediately what was going on and would have had me readmitted to the hospital. But I didn't say anything. I didn't let him know. I didn't call him. I didn't tell him. The nurses didn't notice when I was still, because like I said, when they put me in the room I was discharged, and they put me in the in-room thing at the hospital and stuff. At that point, I was no longer a patient, so the nurses and stuff didn't check on me during that time. I was already discharged. So honestly, my doctor not catching it was my fault, because I didn't say anything. So I want to make sure I put that out there before anybody tries to blame my doctor, because I'm going to tell you right now, that man made a huge impact on my life, like a huge positive impact. And I have more stories to tell about when Daphne was born and everything. But that man had a huge positive impact on my life, and it really bothers me to hear anybody say anything negative about him. So I mean, I just want to make that clear, though, that it wasn't his fault that it wasn't caught. It literally was totally my fault. If I had said something, he would have caught it. So, but anyway, so I'm at my destination where I need to do my grocery shopping and everything, and this video is already running into 35 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead. Like I said, I'm going to try to get more videos out. I may even, because I have a lot of grocery shopping and stuff to do today, I may even try to squeeze in Daphne's birth video, like kind of doing batch recording when I'm on my way home, because we live semi in the boonies. We don't really actually live in town. We live outside of town, and so, like, as you see, it took me a while to get here from where I live. So anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Like, subscribe, leave comments, ask questions. I don't have a very big channel. right now, so generally I try to respond to anybody who sends me any messages or comments on any of my videos and stuff. So feel free to leave a comment. I will more than likely reply. And so that's pretty much it. Everybody have a good day. God bless, and bye.